The formation came out of transit at 0312 station time, 61 vessels dropping from the heliopause corridor in the precise chevron the Bureau had been predicting for 4,000 years. I was on watch. I had been on watch, one rotation in 3, for the last 11 years of my posting at Terrath Deep Station, and every time I settled into the chair I thought, maybe this morning. 11 years. It hadn't been this morning until now. I pulled the old file while the sensor array was still resolving the formation's edge vessels. I didn't need to. I had read it enough times that I could recite the transit corridor equations from memory, could sketch the chevron formation from the fragment illustrations the Bureau's founders had reconstructed by hand from debris recovered in the Caucasus Basin, but protocol said pull the file, so I pulled it. 61 vessels. Lead formation, 7 across. Mid-column, pairs in staggered offset. Trail element, loose spread. The sensor return matched the Bureau's projection to within 4 degrees of arc. Chief Monitor Halen Sir crossed the floor from her station without being called. She had been on Terrath for longer than I had. She looked at the sensor board, looked at the file projection I had thrown to the main display, and said nothing for a moment. Then, 4 degrees. 4 degrees, I said. She pulled a chair and sat down next to me. Neither of us spoke for a while. There was nothing urgent to do. The Deep Fleet had been on silent standby alert since 0100. When the heliopause sensors first registered the approach signature. The orbital batteries had been tracking since 0215. The shield lattice had been at full resonance since 0240. Everything that needed doing had been done by people who had trained for it, in stations and on hulls that had been built for it, using calculations that had been correct for 4,000 years. There was nothing left but to wait and see what the Vorath Covenant made of what they found. I knew what they would find, because I knew what we had built. The Continuity Bureau was older than any institution I could name except the Bureau itself. It had been founded in the 11th century by a Mongolian astronomer named Tserenpantsag, who had found a fragment of hull alloy in a collapsed river terrace and understood, with the methodical patience of a man who spent his life reading the sky, that it had not come from anything human. He did not know what it had come from. What he knew was that it was very old, that the alloy's composition was not achievable with any smelting process he or anyone he corresponded with understood, and that the geometric precision of the fragment's edgework was not accidental. He wrote in his journal, a journal that survives, that I have read, that sits behind glass in the Bureau's archive hall in Almaty, that whatever had made the fragment had been here before and might come back, and that if it came back, it would be useful to know something about it first. He could not have known how right he was. He could not have known how long it would take. What he did was establish the habit of looking, and pass that habit to his students, who passed it to theirs, across 11 centuries and every institutional collapse and political catastrophe the world managed to produce in the interim. The Bureau never became large. It never became famous. It worked because the people in it believed, generation after generation, that the work mattered even if it would not pay off in their lifetime or their children's lifetime or their grandchildren's lifetime. They collected fragments. They mapped debris field distributions. They reconstructed, over 3 centuries of incremental mathematics, the transit corridor equations from the scatter pattern of microdebris that the Covenant's last departure had left across the inner solar system. They published their projections in journals that most of the academic establishment considered eccentric. They built the first dedicated sensor array in 2031, with a budget that would not have been enough to fund a mid-sized university laboratory. By 2180 they had the formation geometry. By 2290 they had the arrival window, not a precise date, but a range of 60 years. By 2400 the range had been compressed to 11 years. That was when the Bureau's projection was declassified, briefed to the relevant defense councils, and the question shifted from whether to when. What followed was not panic. It was not a crisis. It was, in the way of things that humanity does best when given enough time and enough certainty, a very long and very thorough job of work. The orbital batteries went up first, positioned along the transit approach corridor the Bureau's equation specified. Then the shield lattice, grown from a seed network of 17 relay stations into the planetary resonance architecture that now covered every inhabited surface. Then the Deep Fleet, not a crash program, not an emergency measure, but a 30-year construction effort that treated each hull as a permanent installation and named every warship after someone who had worked in the Bureau. I knew most of the names. The lead ship of the 3rd Division was called the Tserenpantsag. I had toured it during its commissioning ceremony. All of this existed before the Vorath Covenant crossed the heliopause. That was the point. That had always been the point. At 0341, the lead vessel's survey ping reached Terrath Deep Station. It was a strong signal, clean, formatted in a carrier wave protocol that our instruments had been calibrated to receive since 2388. The Bureau had reconstructed the Voritha's basic communication architecture from the fragment evidence. Not perfectly, not completely, but well enough. The automated response system answered the ping before I had finished reading the incoming header. What the automated system sent back was not a distress signal, not a challenge, not a weapons lock. It sent the Deep Fleet's current manifest, 340 hulls by class and position, the shield lattice resonance status, the orbital battery grid coordinates, and a formal greeting in reconstructed Vorith script. The script reconstruction was not perfect. Bureau linguists had estimated a 30% error rate in the grammar and an unknown rate in the idiom. But the core statement was intact. It had been drafted by the Bureau's founders and refined over 4 centuries. It said, roughly, "We have been waiting. We know you. We are glad you came back." The Covenant went silent. I watched the sensor board. The formation held its position. No vessel moved. No additional signals were transmitted. The chevron sat at the heliopause and did nothing for 41 minutes. Halen Sir poured 2 cups of coffee from the carafe she kept at her station and set one in front of me without comment. I drank it. It was the best coffee I had ever had, which I recognized was probably a function of the moment rather than the preparation. At 0422, the lead vessel transmitted a response. It was short. Our interpretation system flagged a 62% confidence rating on the translation, which was higher than I had expected. The message said something that rendered into English as, approximately, "We do not have a record for this. Our record for this world indicates extinction class outcome, catalog closed. Please clarify." I keyed the manual override and composed the reply myself. I had thought about what I would say if this moment came. I had not written it down, because writing it down had felt presumptuous, but I had thought about it during 11 years of night watches, and I knew what I wanted to say. I told them, "Your record is 200,000 years old. We have been here the entire time. We would like to show you what we have done with it." Then I transmitted the archive. The full Continuity Bureau archive, 11 centuries of fragment analysis, mathematical reconstruction, transit corridor equations, fleet projections, sensor array data, and the complete record of every human being who had contributed to the work, ran to approximately 400 terabytes of compressed data. It took 11 minutes to transmit at the power levels Teratha's array could sustain. While it transmitted, I sat in my chair and drank my coffee and watched the chevron hold position at the heliopause, 61 vessels that had crossed between stars and arrived this morning expecting to find a dead catalogue entry. I thought about Serenpansag in his tent in the Mongolian basin, turning a fragment of alloy in his hands by lamplight, writing in his journal that whatever had made it might come back. I thought about the 11 centuries of people between him and me who had kept that journal's habit alive through every generation that had better things to do. I thought about the woman who had drafted the greeting message, a bureau linguist named Mada Osebonsu, who had died in 2631, 40 years before the sensor array she had helped design recorded its first confirmed Vorith signature. She had known she would not be there for this morning. She had done the work anyway. The archive transmission completed at 0433. The Covenant remained silent for a further 2 hours and 17 minutes. At 0650, the lead vessel transmitted again. This time the message was longer. Our interpretation system managed 44% confidence, which was enough to understand the structure if not every word. The Covenant's commander, a designation that translated roughly as Survey SEAL, the senior officer of a reclamation fleet, requested what appeared to be a formal parley. A meeting. The signal also contained something our system flagged as an emotional register marker, a grammatical feature the Bureau had identified in recovered Vorith text fragments but never been entirely certain about. The system's best interpretation of the register, something in the range of unclassifiable. Not the marker for alarm. Not the marker for hostility. Something the Bureau's linguists had labelled, in a footnote to their grammar reconstruction, as the Vorith grammatical form for a situation that has no precedent in the records. I keyed my uplink to Fleet Command and filed the parley request through the appropriate channels. It would take time, days, probably, before the protocols were agreed and the formats established and the parties positioned. That was fine. We had waited 200,000 years. We could wait a few more days. While I was filing the paperwork, Halen Sir brought up the oldest fragment image from the Bureau archive on the secondary display, the original piece of alloyed Serenpansag had found, photographed in high resolution, edge geometry still precise after all this time. The Bureau had never been able to identify exactly what part of a Vorath vessel it had come from. It was approximately the size of a hand. It had sat in a collapsed river terrace for 200,000 years before a man with good eyes and a habit of looking picked it up. At 0712, as the station's daywatch crew began arriving and I was preparing to hand over the board, I transmitted one more message to the Covenant's lead vessel. It was not part of the official Pali process. It was not in the Bureau's formal communication protocols. I had not cleared it with Fleet Command. It was the final line of Tserenpansag's journal, the last entry he wrote before his death, the sentence the Bureau had used as its institutional motto for 11 centuries. The words Mata Ose Bonsu had included at the bottom of the original greeting message draft before the committee had removed them as insufficiently formal. I had always thought the committee was wrong. The line read, in the Bureau's best reconstruction of Vorath script, we kept the count. 3 words. 11 centuries of people. 61 vessels sitting silent at the edge of the solar system, holding a catalogue entry that said extinction class outcome, staring at 340 warships and a shield lattice that covered an entire world and a greeting written in their own language, trying to find a record that explained any of it. I handed over the board to the daywatch officer, picked up my jacket, and walked out into the plateau morning. The sky above Tereth was pale and cold and entirely clear. Somewhere above it, invisible at this distance, the Deep Fleet was holding position in geosynchronous spread, 340 hulls with their hull numbers and their Bureau names, waiting with the same patience the Bureau had taught them. I had been on watch for 11 years. I had read the old file enough times to recite it in my sleep. I had thought about this morning on every night rotation, in the way you think about something you believe in without being certain you will see it. What I had not thought about, not clearly, was how quiet it would feel. Not triumphant. Not electric. Just finished. The way a very long piece of work feels when the last line is done and there is nothing left to do but put down the pen. We had kept the count. We had kept it for 200,000 years, across every catastrophe and every generation that had reason to forget, and we had been standing here when they came back. That was enough. That had always been enough. It was the only thing we had ever needed it to be.